Good evening, you're watching London Live News at 6 with James Dickman. Coming up tonight, a week of travel misery for millions in the capital as Transport for London gets set to walk out tomorrow with all services on the London Underground down. It will be the biggest striking week in 30 years as rail staff across the UK also begin winding down for 3 days of industrial action starting tomorrow, then again on Thursday and once more on Saturday in disputes over pay. We'll have a look at London's weather in the next 10 minutes. It's looking bright and warm for the next week. We'll also have the inspiring story of a young man who took his stage 4 cancer diagnosis and turned it into an inspiring 30,000-kilometre cycling ride for charity to China and back through COVID, which saw stops in London last week as it came to an end. And more on a new theatre show celebrating the female pioneers who changed the world. But first, a week of transport strikes for Londoners is about to be felt hard for commuters and festival goers across the capital, with a 3-day national rail strike and a separate strike on the Underground network tomorrow starting at 5 a.m. officially. The rail strike will see tomorrow, Thursday and Saturday all severely affected. Last-minute talks between unions and rail bosses continued today with industrial action which was considered likely to start nonetheless. Some already saw services affected today as the rail network workers begin winding down, with bosses saying only to try and use train services on non-strike days if it's completely necessary. The RMT union says its members were opposing stagnating pay and proposed job losses and wanted justice, while the Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers Union has said it will intensify its strike campaign if members don't get an agreeable deal. Treasury Chief Secretary Simon Clarke spoke to the BBC this morning, saying that the strikes are likely to go ahead and it's not up to the government to resolve the dispute.
We all want to see a sensible pay increase. Linked to that, we need to see reform of some of the practices that make our railway a very unsustainable entity at the moment. We have to recognise that the way that our rail network operates is not fit for the 2020s, and it's in nobody's interest that that continues, because ultimately for the trade union members themselves, if they want to have jobs long into the future, which I certainly want to happen, then we need to have a rail industry which is sustainable. And you know, we spent some £16 billion supporting the railways during the COVID pandemic. That's the equivalent of £600 per household. All we are asking in return is that the industry reforms itself sensibly so that it can financially sustain itself, and that is not something which at the moment it's possible to say. So we need this to be resolved, and that is part of the negotiations alongside pay.
Well, TfL workers for the Tube will also strike, with all lines affected and severely reduced service tomorrow. Though unconnected, at the heart of both of these disputes is the government wanting both Transport for London and Network Rail to change and make savings. The reason for this latest underground action stems from the government's demands to TfL to make savings of £400 million a year as part of its pandemic bailout. Mayor Sadiq Khan agreed to make savings, including reviewing pensions, with TfL currently paying about £360 million into the pension fund per year. They also plan to lose 600 currently vacant roles to help make cuts. TfL bosses say no one will lose their job in doing so. Well, combined with the rail walkouts, it means that action is expected to be the largest strike since 1989. And more strikes as criminal barristers have voted to strike in an escalating dispute with the government over funding for trials. The vote by defence barristers is likely to cause chaos in the criminal courts, delaying trials and sentencing. 8 out of 10 barristers voted for the walkouts amid concerns the government will not improve a proposed increase in criminal legal aid. The legal aid system is at the heart of justice, ensuring that all defendants get proper and fair representation. But it's thought things could also get even worse. 2 teaching unions warned they were considering balloting members over strike action if a significant pay rise is not offered. Nurses are also expected to be considering walkouts soon over pay as well. Local government workers, including bin men, are also in the mix to act too. The The strikes are all about wages, which have fallen relative to inflation in recent months, which is set to top 11% at the end of the year. An interesting summer ahead. Now, the transport chaos continues across the board, as around 30 flights carrying up to 5,000 passengers have been cancelled at Heathrow Airport due to technical issues affecting baggage systems. The airport asked airlines to cut 10% of flights from schedules across Terminals 2 and 3 on Monday. It comes after problems at baggage reclaim areas, with images of luggage being piled up high emerging last week. It's not yet known what airlines are most affected by the cancellations. The issue has been largely down to staff shortages, with many saying Brexit is at fault for a lack of available people to fill roles. The Parliament's Standards Commissioner has opened an investigation into the MP for Tottenham, David Lammy, over allegedly failing to declare £27,000 in financial interests in good time. The investigation into the shadow Foreign Secretary was over late declarations of earnings and hospitality for speeches during Black History Month and separate invites to Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. It comes after Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer was placed under a similar investigation for alleged late declarations too. A 15-year-old boy has been charged with murder after a fatal stabbing in North London. The teenager was not being named by police because of his age. He is accused of the murder of 17-year-old Ali Begoran from Tottenham, North London, who was stabbed in Orchard Place at around 10 past midnight on Saturday. Two other teenagers, aged 16 and 17, were arrested at the scene on suspicion of murder. They've been released on bail, pending further inquiries. Two men have been charged with the murder of a man whose burning remains were discovered in West London. The body of Subere Badade, who's 28 years old, was found after firefighters were called to Bellevue Park in Northolt, St Ealing, to reports of a fire on June the 13th. Two men in their 30s have appeared before magistrates in Ealing today. A couple of other stories to bring you. According to reports, Chelsea Football Club director Marina Granovskaya is poised to become the next big name to leave the club after it was confirmed today that Bruce Buck will step down as chairman after 19 years in the role. If that's the case, it has been suggested Todd Boehly, the American who took control in West London after completing his takeover, may oversee transfer negotiations himself. Well, she was lauded the club's best director in her role under the former owner, the sanctioned oligarch tied to Vladimir Putin, Roman Abramovich. Now, the Duke of Cambridge has pledged his support to the big issue ahead of his 40th birthday tomorrow. William is the cover star of the latest issue after he was seen selling copies of the magazine in London before the Platinum Jubilee in Westminster. Well, he's since opened up about his time helping the initiative that seeks to combat homelessness. He's penned a letter in the latest issue sharing the story of how it was his mother Diana that first opened his eyes to the problem when he was 11 years old. Right, let's take one quick look at the weather for you now. Temperatures not in the 30s like last week, but still pretty high. A sunny outlook and getting warmer as we head through the week into Thursday before it cools off. Staying warm this evening and overnight, highs of around 23 degrees tomorrow. Cloud cover in some areas, but mostly clear. Looking ahead to Wednesday, it will be climbing into the high 20s again, and Thursday around 29 degrees Celsius. So a good start for those heading to Glastonbury, as long as you're not taking a train. Right, just before a break, farcical scenes in Westminster today at the Houses of Parliament. Not what you might be thinking, though. Hollywood superstar Steve Carell was on hand, joined by two life-size Minions from the Despicable Me film franchise to promote the latest movie, Minions: The Rise of Gru. Well, Stuart and Kevin are the names of the two yellow stars who joined the US Office actor who voices Gru in the shadow of Big Ben today. Right, stay with us. You're watching London Live News. Still to come after the break. It's Cervical Screening Awareness Week this week, and we'll hear from one cancer survivor on the importance of going to get checked.
From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live.
Welcome back. On to some of the other day's main national headlines affecting Londoners. The UK's energy regulator has announced plans to better protect customers who pay their bills through direct debit. Ofgem accused some firms of using customers as accumulated credit like an interest-free company credit card. Proposals include tightening the rules on the level of direct debits that suppliers can charge to ensure credit balances do not become excessive. Ofgem also wants to protect credit balances when suppliers fail, so costs are not picked up by customers. EasyJet has announced plans to cut more flights over the busy summer holiday period. The airline previously expected to run about 97% of its pre-COVID flight levels between July and September, but that's now being scaled back to 90%. It comes after Gatwick Airport said they would limit flight and passenger numbers. Passengers have faced delays and cancellations at airports in recent weeks, partly due to smaller staff numbers unable to cope with demand. And the former Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, has revealed that he had cancer but has since recovered. The Conservative MP for South West Surrey said it was minor. The chair of the Health and Social Care Select Committee said cancer had touched his family very dramatically. He is now planning to take part in a 3-mile race to raise money for cancer charities in July.
Every member of my family has had cancer, and I've had a minor one myself, which has fortunately been resolved. So it's touched my family very dramatically, and I know it's touched many, many families. And my work on the Select Committee has shown me that there are lots of things we could do to improve our cancer survival rates, and they are getting better. But the more we can do to raise money and raise awareness, the more lives we'll save.
Now, staying with the disease, this week Cervical Screening Awareness Week takes place, and according to NHS data, around 2 in 5 in London don't take up the offer for cervical screening. There are around 3,200 new cervical cancer cases in the UK every year. That's nearly 9 every day. Well, Faye was diagnosed with cervical cancer in 2020, aged 31. She wants to share her story and encourage others to attend those screenings and the importance in doing so. Faye, thank you very much for coming on today. Just take me back to a couple of years ago. What happened in terms of the way you found out, and why did you go to that screening? You must be very pleased that you did so.
Yeah, of course. So for me, back in 2019, I'd started to experience some sort of abnormal bleeding, lower back pain, but I was going through quite a stressful time in my personal life, so I didn't really think much of it. I'd actually put off going for my screening because cancer didn't run in my family, it would never happen to me, I'll get around to going. And then when I did go, they sort of noticed some abnormalities. And then fast forward to New Year's Day 2020, and I was sort of rushed into hospital with quite a heavy bleeding. And it was from then on that I sort of realised that there was something a bit more sinister going on.
Yeah. You must really feel quite passionately then on what is Cervical Awareness Week, Cervical Screening Awareness Week, that people really need to go out and get tested. Would that be your main message that you just want others to know?
Yeah, of course. And I think just taking away that stigma around it, like talk openly, tell your sisters, girlfriends, wives, like everyone should go. If 5 minutes of discomfort could have saved me 6 weeks of quite intensive treatment and still suffering from the after effects of that as well.
Yeah, you mentioned at the time in 2019 you were going through a couple of other things, you had a stressful personal life perhaps, and that is something I think that a lot of people, it will resonate with a lot of people, particularly now, given the cost of living crisis and everything going on. People will feel like, they can put these things aside, but would you say to them that there's nothing more important than your health, even in such trying times?
No, that's it. Like, I was relatively fit and healthy, regularly went to the gym, and it was just prioritising me over sort of other stuff you have going on, and it really can make such an impact.
Yeah. And how have you sort of struggled through that? How are you doing now, and how grateful you are for the treatment you've received?
Yeah, so I went through treatment sort of February into March, and then sort of as March hit is when COVID was in the sort of extremes over here. I was taken down sort of back wings of hospitals to just finish off my treatment. So it was hard, and then having to isolate at such an extreme as well. So I'm very grateful for the sort of NHS and what I did receive. I know other people sort of within the cancer community haven't been that lucky.
Faye, thank you very much for joining me. Faye, a former cervical cancer sufferer, on the importance of getting screened for the disease and staying with the issue of cancer. On Thursday last week, an incredible achievement was realised, finishing at the Royal Albert Hall. Cycling inspiration Luke Grenfell-Shaw completed one of the last legs of his Bristol to Beijing expedition to end up at the iconic venue in Kensington in London before Moving on, Luke was diagnosed with metastatic cancer in 2018, aged 24, and decided to challenge himself with a 30,000-kilometre ride in 2020 from here to China, which has been no mean feat, particularly with COVID getting in the way of all that. Well, it's all in aid of the Teenage Cancer Trust, among some other charities, and Luke was with me earlier.
So I've spent the last 2.5 years cycling from Bristol to Beijing, and yesterday I finished the ride with my family, with my friends. It was an incredibly special day. And a few days ago, I was in front of the Royal Albert Hall, courtesy of Teenage Cancer Trust, who got me there. And that was like the perfect way to finish my time off in London. It was a bit of a heat box, to be honest, as well. Baking day, no wind. So there was a bit of a sweat fest going on, but it was an amazing day.
Yeah. Tell us what it's all about, and because you wanted to start in 2020, but there was a bit of an issue going on a worldwide one. I think we all remember. Tell us a bit about how that affected you, how you had to navigate the pandemic, and what you've been doing.
So yeah, James, I started this cycle ride on New Year's Day 2020. The reason I started cycling from Bristol to Beijing on a tandem bike going 30,000 kilometers through 30 countries across the world is that back in 2018, 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And, it was basically the worst time to try and cross the world in 2020. Huge problems. But I managed to get across so many countries all the way to the border with China. And then I just wasn't able to cross the border into China because it's just closed because of COVID. So I did the final 3,300 kilometers in London on my tandem bike, and over 400 people came and joined me.
Yeah, tell me a bit about that. What did that feel like to have such support? And, tell us a bit about your kind of passion behind this, because how are you getting on with your cancer treatment now? Is it all done? What stage are you at?
Yeah, so look, for me, when I was diagnosed with cancer, it was devastating. I was 24 years old, and I was just like about to put my foot on the accelerator of life. I was thinking about, I'm going to be climbing the career ladder. I'm thinking about, houses, families, all of these things. And then cancer comes along, and I think I'm not going to live at all. And I thought, if I'm only going to do one more thing, I really want to cycle around the world, meet loads of people, have loads of interesting experiences, and show what's possible with cancer. And I had 28 people join me on this journey who also had cancer, which is like the most special thing. And along the way, we're raising £300,000 for 4 amazing cancer charities, including Teenage Cancer Trust, Young Lives versus Cancer, Trek Stock, and 5K Your Way. We've raised over £120,000 so far. We're still gunning to hit that £300,000 mark. But it's been so special, and like in London, met so many characters. I met some guy from Colombia who pedaled on the back of the tandem in his rollerblades. I met some guy from Hawaii who was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer 21 years ago. He should have been dead 21 years ago. And for me, that was like the most affirming thing. And it's like, wow, there's hope. And if this story can be a little bit of hope for some people, then I go to sleep a very, very happy person.
Yeah. Have you found, in a kind of ironic sense, it's given you a new lease on life that you perhaps wouldn't have had without such, sad news to happen to you?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It completely changes your perspective on life and like what's important. And, my mantra now is that, I want each and every day that I live to be worthwhile. And like, I'm not like, oh, I'm going to do 3 or 5 years, something I don't really enjoy, because in the future I'll be able to kind of cash in. For me, I want each and every day to be worthwhile and to meet really cool people, and that's what happened in London as well. You had so many random conversations with people from I think I had about 35 different countries, from Lebanon to Chile to Luxembourg, all over.
How do you feel today now it's all done? Are you sort of setting your sights on the next thing you could do to try and raise money, or are you going to take a little bit of time off? How are the legs? They must be hurting a bit.
I mean, to be honest, it's my voice that's gone. I think it's a bit of a message from London saying, shut up, Luke. You've been talking too much. So that needs a bit of a break. But yeah, I'm writing a book. We're making a documentary, so I'm really excited to get those out and share the story more fully. So for me, that's a really exciting thing. There are other plans in the works, but you just have to watch that space.
If you still want to donate, bristol2beijing.org, and you can read plenty more details as well. You're watching London Live News with James Dickman. A reminder, our top story is coming up after the break, plus the impact of the cost of living crisis on London children unveiled. More on the way in the next 10 minutes.
From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live.
Welcome back to London Live News. Let's have a reminder of our main sort of stories today, and it's all about striking. A week of industrial action for Londoners is about to be felt hard for commuters and festival goers for Glastonbury across the capital, with a 3-day national rail strike and a separate one on the Underground that starts tomorrow at 5 a.m. officially. The rail strike will see tomorrow, Thursday and Saturday all severely affected. Last-minute talks between unions and rail bosses continued today, but the industrial action was considered likely to start. Some already saw services affected as the rail network workers began to wind down this morning, with bosses saying only to try and use train services on non-strike days if completely necessary. Well, the RMT union says its members were opposing stagnating pay and proposed job losses and wanted justice. The Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers Union has said it will intensify its strike campaign if members don't get an agreeable deal. Treasury Chief Secretary Simon Clarke spoke to the BBC this morning, saying the strikes are likely to go ahead tomorrow and it's not up to the government to resolve the disputes.
We all want to see a sensible pay increase. Linked to that, we need to see reform of some of the practices that make our railway a very unsustainable entity at the moment. We have to recognise that the way that our rail network operates is not fit for the 2020s, and it's in nobody's interest that that continues, because ultimately for the trade union members themselves, if they want to have jobs long into the future, which I certainly want to happen, then we need to have a rail industry which is sustainable. And you know, we spent some £16 billion supporting the railways during the COVID pandemic. That's the equivalent of £600 per household. All we are asking in return is that the industry reforms itself sensibly so that it can financially sustain itself, and that is not something which at the moment it's possible to say. So we need this to be resolved, and that is part of the negotiations alongside pay with the unions at the moment.
Well, TfL workers for the Tube will also strike, with all lines affected and severely reduced service tomorrow. Though unconnected, at the heart of both of these disputes is the government wanting both Transport for London and Network Rail to change and make savings. The reason for this latest underground action stems from the government's demands to TfL to make savings of £400 million a year as part of its pandemic bailout. Mayor Sadiq Khan agreed to make savings, including reviewing pensions, with TfL currently paying about £360 million into the pension fund per year. They also plan to lose 600 currently vacant roles to help make cuts. TfL bosses say no one will lose their job in doing so. Well, combined with the rail walkouts, it means that action is expected to be the largest strike since 1989. Now, London's child poverty charity has revealed the impact of the cost of living crisis that it's having on disadvantaged children and young people through a new report. It showed 47% of parents said their children are stressed out about the crisis, while Lawrence Guinness is the CEO of the Childhood Trust and told Alicia more.
We did a survey of some 2,000 families across the country and found some really alarming statistics and findings relating to the cost of living crisis in this country. We found that some 21% of, a third of parents said that their children are struggling at the moment. Let's start with that, and are not coping very well with the cost of living crisis. But then we drill down into what some of those, what that looks like for children. 21% are smiling less, which we found really sad. The worst thing for us was that 9% of the parents reported that their children may well be self-harming as a consequence of stress brought about by the cost of living crisis. What we're finding is, some 45% of the parents said that they were really, really struggling, and about half of those said they were incapacitated due to unable to pay their bills or worry and anxiety about the future. So what our findings showed in relation to rising prices into a state of kind of anxiety, of fear, is that this is having a terrible, a devastating impact on children. and our work in funding the delivery of projects that support children, we're seeing more and more children coming to grassroots community projects because they're hungry, because they're lonely, because they're fed up, and they're kind of really depressed and sad and anxious and worried. So to give you a sense of what that looks like, one little boy told me he'd started attending a project in Bermondsey that we're funding. And, you get the sense he'd not been there before or, in previous years. And he said, no, I'm really worried. He said, because I used to be able to have a shower whenever I want. He said, now my mum stands outside the shower and makes sure I only have a short shower, and I'm only allowed one once a week now. He said, but I'm worried that my parents are going to lose their jobs and will be homeless, and then I won't know what will happen to us. So here's an example of a child whose circumstances clearly are stretched, are changed, and he's ruminating on this. He's worried about it, and this is what we're obviously highly concerned about, and it's what our findings really draw attention to. That after 2 years of pandemic, where the disadvantaged children really suffered the very most, we're now seeing the same set of children having to cope with even worse kind of deprivations, as well as other children, being affected by this.
How can parents in London manage this and cope with helping their children through what is a difficult time? What can the parents actually be doing?
From our working closely with children and talking to children and their parents, what's essential, as it was during the COVID pandemic, is that parents take the time to talk to their children about the things that are worrying them. A lot of parents think, we're trying to protect our children by not talking about these things, but really one needs to bring it out into the open, because often the reality is that, yes, families are having to tighten their belts. Yes, they're having to economize. Yes, many families are having to go to food banks to survive. But children need to be part of the conversation. They need to understand that things will get better, that their worst fears won't come to pass. And even if the parent can't do anything about it, they need to be able to hold the child's anxiety, worry, stress, and be the parent. Children need to talk about this. They need to talk to someone, and their parent is a good person to talk to. So have that conversation. Don't be shy in bringing up some of these difficult subjects. Children are very sharp. They know what's happening, but they need reassurance. They need to know that things will be okay, that this will pass, which it will, and that in the meantime, the whole family, everyone can play their part in getting through this.
In your experience, which age group are the most affected and most aware of what's going on?
Well, we know that children as young as 5 are acutely aware of living in poverty, of not having the things that their peers have. It affects different children at different ages. Many younger children up to the age of 10, 11, 12, just accept the way their lives are. As children become more grown up in the teenage years, they start to pull away from their parents, start to individuate, form their own identities. That's when I think they're especially vulnerable, because they often resent the fact they haven't got the things that their peers have, that they seem to be left out in society, that they seem to be exceptionally disadvantaged. And we've seen many children exploit, vulnerable children who are being exploited by criminal gangs, who are, vulnerable in that sense. They don't have any money. Criminality offers a way out of that. So these are really difficult times for teenagers who are coming from very low income families. But it's difficult for all children. It's very hard. There's no one group. It just affects different children at different times, in different ways during their childhood.
Right, time for a break, but coming up, the art of making and mending Somerset House's latest exhibition shows Londoners how to repair things we might have thought we'd lost.
From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live.
Welcome back to the final part of this evening's programme. Let's start it with some art, and Somerset House's new summer exhibition is all about care and repair. Eternally Yours it's called, and it features artists and designers and offers visitors the chance to watch live repair demonstrations and workshops from the experts. Well, let's take a look.
The exhibition is called Eternally Yours. And it's about care, repair and healing. I think we've all learned lessons during the pandemic. We've all, in a way, had to step back and reassess things. We're all looking at the way we live our lives now. And I think ideas of care and repair are really important in this process. So it's not just about the things we surround ourselves with, but it's also about how we repair ourselves and how we repair our society. What the exhibition does quite well is to tell the very different stories of care and repair. And there are many different objects and artworks in the show that tell very different stories, from the idea of trauma to the idea of how precious a tool can be. Aya Haydar is a really interesting Lebanese-born British artist whose work is really powerful. For this exhibition, she's taken slippers that have been given to her by migrants escaping from their countries, from war and from trauma. And of course, these shoes, they've walked out with these shoes on their feet, and they're in no fit state actually to be repaired. So what she's done instead is she's embroidered their stories. Another artist in the show is the Japanese artist Aono Fumiaki, and he has collected the debris of the Japanese earthquake that happened after the meltdown of the Fukushima nuclear plant. For any piece that's missing something, rather than replacing it, he's inserting a piece of wood in the void, painting it white and extending it in a way kind of showing its ghostly non-presence.
My own preoccupation with mending actually begins with damage. So the way I think about mending is, first of all, I'm trying to notice and value and appreciate things that have aged and got damaged. And that the act of repair is a small act of care, or the mending, to pay attention to that damage. So I suppose for me what's important is this opportunity that repair gives you to pay attention to change, and that could be aging, that could be about yourself, that could be about others. They've selected the Norwegian Sweater, which is a piece of work I made in 2010. It was truly a rag of a garment. Just the arms were hanging by threads, the chest was full of holes, all the fixings were missing, the brass fixings, the buttons. It took me about, I think, 4 months to put it back together with white wool darning, so a plain woven darning technique. And I really worked, what I was very keen to do with this piece was make visible what was missing.
In the middle of the exhibition, we have an actual repair shop. And it's a live repair shop, and they are designers and craftspeople, repairers who are mending things. What we've done in that repair shop is actually collected as much junk as we can find, so things that are unwanted, discarded, and it's their task to create beautiful and useful things out of this junk. Toast, the lifestyle brand, has set up some wonderful workshops adjacent to the exhibition, and there are pop-up workshops where you can actually bring things in to be repaired.
For me, it's a lot easier to talk through difficult things through an object than maybe, like if you meet someone for the first time and you say, well, that's a nice jumper, or how do you get that hole in something? That very practical inquiry or observation about something material leads you to a wider conversation. They might then tell you more about themselves. And I would suggest that this act of mending can be a conduit, particularly garments, for exploring more difficult emotions that you may be struggling with.
Eternally Yours is on at Somerset House until September, so plenty of time to get down for that. Now, a new musical celebrating some of the most famous women from history is on show in the capital before embarking on a UK tour. Fantastically Great Women Who Changed the World is based on the book of the same name by suffragette descendant Kate Pankhurst. It's on at the Theatre Royal in Stratford East and follows the heroine Jade as she meets icons from the past. Henry has been speaking to the stars of the show.
follows a young girl called Jade, like me. And she goes into a museum wing and she ends up meeting some of the incredible women in history. It's based on a book by Kate Pankhurst, and it follows all the women in that book and how they've changed and shaped our lives today, how they changed and shaped lives then. And she learns a lot from them and figures out a lot about herself on the way.
So, Christina, I often ask guests who they play, but this is different and really interesting because you guys play so many. There are so many stories in the show. How do you go about telling all these stories in one?
Yeah, that's been the trickiness, because the show's an hour and a half long, so it's about sort of compacting it all into that time as well. I play Jane Austen, Gertrude Ederle, and Mary Anning, and it's wonderful. I think what we've done is we've taken the sections from their stories that are relevant to Jade, as in the young person Jade. We've taken the parts of what they stand for to encourage her. So it's not like you're getting the entirety of their life stories. We just literally take the nuggets that we need to move her along.
Do you two have a favourite person that you portray? That's quite a hard question, maybe.
We actually have a scene together, which we absolutely love doing, where I play Jane Austen, and go on, Jade, you can say who you play.
And I play Frida Kahlo, who's like just such a huge inspiration for me anyway. And that scene, they're best friends, Frida Kahlo and Jane Austen, in the magical world are fantastically great. And it's just great because they're just these artists who have so many principles and values, and they just bounce off each other in this funny but so heartwarming way. It's great fun.
And they're like chalk and cheese, aren't they? So when we put them together, it actually really works. And also, I wonder if it's like they're creative women, and the show tackles like a broad spectrum of talent. So we've got sport, dinosaurs, science, creativity, adventure. There's so many different things that we encompass, but I think because these two are perhaps the most creative as well, we absolutely love doing it.
Goes off the rails.
They're all great women, of course, and they're all very well known. But do you think the stories of women in history are perhaps maybe not quietened, but maybe not told as often as the stories of men?
100%.
I know that Christina and I both have admitted this. Even coming to this project, there's women in this that we actually didn't know. We didn't know about as women. So I think definitely, I think it's really hard to argue that that's not the case, because even in this show, there's only, I think, 12 historical women. I can't count right now. And some of those we didn't even know about, and they literally made things the way that they are. So definitely there are so many stories that are untold or that are told too little, and that's kind of the point of this show, is just to shine a big spotlight on those people and just talk about them and get people talking about them and learning about them and inspire people to follow similar routes, because why not? They did some incredible things.
And I think that's what's glorious about Kate's collection of books, because now young people are starting to learn that, and the options are endless for young women, or hopefully will become endless, which is so exciting.
Yeah, that's one thing I wanted to mention, is that this is based on the book by Kate Pankhurst, of course, a descendant of a suffragette. So is that another reason why you two are just, leapt at the chance to be in this production?
I think it was one of the reasons. We were all involved in an early workshop in May last year, and we just connected to it. And there are not many projects that you join because of the pure need to tell the story. And I think that I certainly wish that I'd had this knowledge when I was younger. It would have perhaps broadened my perspective. And so telling this to a younger audience is something, this job is bigger than just being on stage for us. This story is much bigger than that.
Absolutely. And even like stepping into the room and being surrounded by, because our creative process was informed by a lot of other incredible women who are very intelligent and strong. and, you know, working alongside someone like Miranda Cooper, who wrote for like Girls Aloud and Sugar Babes, like these icons in like the pop world of like growing up in music. And then you're working underneath someone like Rhymes, who I've watched her choreography in like a Western stage and things like that. And you're just surrounded by Amy Hodge, who directed the whole piece, these women who put it together. And even that's rare in our line of work, to be surrounded by that many women and forming a female story. And just, it felt like just this really special room and a hub of creativity that just bounced these lives and these stories into such a beautiful landscape and just made it something really special.
And that is fantastically great!
That's on at Theatre Royal Stratford East until the 17th of July. Let's take a final look at the weather before we leave you this evening. Temperatures, nothing in the 30s like last week, luckily, but still a sunny outlook and getting warmer as we head through to Thursday. Staying warm into the evening and overnight tonight. Highs of around 23 degrees tomorrow. Cloud cover in some areas, although looking ahead to Wednesday, it will be climbing into the high 20s again, and Thursday may hit around 29 degrees Celsius. A good start for those heading to Glastonbury. Right, that is all we have time for this evening. Thank you very much for watching, and join us again at the very same time tomorrow. But for now, take care, good evening, and enjoy the warm weather.